Hello, Bio 16. Today we're going to be covering the reproductive system of the male, which is the first part of chapter 27. So the human reproductive system basically produces gametes through the process called meiosis, which is a type of cell division that reduces the amount of chromosomal tissue by half. The reproductive systems will produce these gametes, which in males are called sperm and in females are called ovum. They're not eggs, they're called ova in humans. And these gametes are stored and nourished and prepared for transportation to prepare for fertilization. So fertilization of a sperm and an ova produces what we call a zygote. The zygote is basically the first cell that will produce an organism. The reproductive system produces sex hormones in addition, both in males and females. And what that's going to do is affect how the function and the structure of other organ systems in the body develop over the lifetime of the organism or of the person. So the reproductive system in males is called, the testes, and the testes themselves produce spermatozoa, or the sperm, and hormones. Now, the reason we call it spermatozoa is because the sperm go through a series of steps in their development, which we'll go through in a few minutes. They're not formal sperm until they're ejaculated. The reproductive tract in males will receive the spermatozoa, store them, and transport them very efficiently for fertilization. So the reproductive system in males is broken down into specific segments: the epididymis, the vas deferens, which is a long duct, the ejaculatory duct, and the urethra, which we're familiar with from the urinary system. The glands that will be producing different fluids to support the sperm and fertilization, or the spermatozoa, are the seminal vesicles, the prostate gland, the bulbal urethral gland, and, which produces seminal fluid, and the seminal fluid formally is called semen. And the semen consists of a number of different fluids from the seminal vesicles, prostate gland, and bulbal urethral gland. So I guess you could say if you take the fluid from the prostate, add that to the seminal vesicle fluid, add that to the bulbal urethral gland, you end up with semen, or seminal fluid as a formal term. Perineal structures, are called the external genitalia, or penile structures, you could say. Those are going to be the penis and the scrotum, and those are the easiest to view externally. So, just looking at the overall gross anatomy of the male reproductive system, let's start internally with the testes. The testes is the site of meiosis, where the initial spermatozoa are generated. They are stored in the epididymis, which is this region right here. The epididymis is connected to the ductus deferens, or the, I tried to pick a color that would work well, so I tried to pick orange. Hopefully you can kind of see that. Maybe I'll switch over to red right now. The ductus deferens then connects to the seminal vesicle. I'm changing my ink color right now to red, hoping that'll work better. So the ductus deferens travels upwards, wraps around the urethra. Remember, the urethra is coming down from the kidneys here. And the urethra connects to the urinary bladder in this region. Here's the urinary bladder. It connects right here, posterior laterally. So the ductus deferens connects all the way around, wraps behind the urethra, and attaches to the seminal vesicle. The seminal vesicle then will attach down to the ejaculatory duct right here, which goes right through the prostate gland, which then will come down through the bulbal urethral duct. So here's the bulbal urethral gland right here. This will produce fluid that will also come into the urethra and exit out for fertilization. So some of the vocabulary that you're going to need to know will revolve around just the basic testes, epididymis, ductus deferens, leading all the way up around through the seminal vesicle. Sorry, ductus deferens should have been 3. Seminal vesicle will be 4. Down through the prostate, which will be 5. The ejaculatory duct itself is 6 right here. This is the exit down through here, which will then become associated with the bulbourethral gland, and then out through the urethra. Now, adjacent to all of this is, like I mentioned, you're going to find the urinary bladder, the ureters leading down into the urinary bladder. The rectum is posterior to this entire system. Now, and then the rectum, of course, from the digestive system, we know, exits out through the anus. The pubic symphysis is the large part of the large pubic bones, set of pubic bones that we studied in the skeletal system. Now, the one term that we haven't talked about necessarily yet, or the couple of terms, are going to be the corpus spongiosum. Okay, so that's one. Corpus cavernosum, number two, that we haven't talked about. And then we will be talking about the layers of the scrotum. Okay, so we'll get to that in a little bit, but the corpus spongiosum and the corpus cavernosum produce, or they're made up of a lot of spongy tissue that consists of lots and lots of blood vessels that under some autonomic activation will fill with blood and produce an erection. So let's start with the testes. The testes are located inside of the scrotum, and the scrotum is several layers of skin and tissues that surround the tissue that produce gametes. And so the structure of the testes, if we were to section the testes coronally, would be the tunica ablugina, and this is going to be dense, fibrous connective tissue that's going to surround the testes, keep them very protected, and the tunica ablugita, is covered by another layer called the tunica vaginalis. The tunica vaginalis itself is a serous membrane, and this is going to be outlining each of the testes and lining the scrotal cavity. I have a picture of this in a few minutes. Now, the tunica ablugina, I never say that right, is going to be part of forming the septum between the two halves of the testes. The testes aren't considered like half one and half two. They're actually two separate organs or two separate lobules. So the tunica ablugina is separating the two. Seminiferous tubules, these guys are feet or many miles, half a mile actually, not many miles, but half a mile worth of tubules zigzagged within the lobules of the testes. And I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. This is where meiosis physically occurs, and this is where the spermatozoa are produced. The seminiferous tubules are going to enter into these straighter tubules, which I'll show you in a minute, which then goes to the rete testes, the efferent ducts, and eventually to the epididymis, where the sperm mature into, or the spermatozoa mature into mature sperm. This is going to be, the testes are going to be consisting of these thousands of interstitial endocrinocytes, or Leydig cells, and we'll look at that here in just a sec. So again, sectioning coronally through the testes, you'll see that the external tissue is made up of skin. So we have the skin right here. We didn't mention this before, but there are several layers of muscle, the dartos muscle. And so here's the dartos muscle, which is adjacent to the skin. Adjacent to that is the superficial scrotal fascia, or connective tissue, that helps protect the very delicate gamete-producing tissue. So this is going to be making up the scrotum, or the outer skin. There's an internal layer of muscle, the cremaster muscle, right here, and this is a kind of a circular muscle compared to the dartos muscle, which is more longitudinal. And then we have our tunics, our two tunics here, the tunica vaginalis, which are these layers, one right here and one right here, two layers, one that's going to be surrounding the testes themselves, and one that is kind of protecting the region. But basically, it's a single layer that wraps around, so you can see that it forms a cavity, all right, the tunica vaginalis. And then you have the tunica ablugina. The ablugina is this tunic right here. It's not this white outline here. It's the one that's kind of outlining each of the lobules. All right, so you may want to go look at this in your book so you can get more detail. This black region is the scrotal cavity. So the scrotal cavity separates the tunica vaginalis from the tunica ablugina. There we go. Now the septa are going to be separating each individual lobule. So here's the septa, these regions here, the white regions between each lobule. And then we have the perineal raphe. The perineal raphe is the separation between the two halves of the testes. So this is just an artist's rendition of what the testes looks like, kind of, through cross-section. Each one of these lobules contains these long tubules, which lead up to the efferent ductile, which are right here, 1, 2, 3, which then lead to the epididymis. Now, yes, it's kind of a silly term, but the epididymis is sometimes called sperm boot camp. This is where the sperm mature, where they elaborate a really long flagella so they can swim to their target. And then right here at the top is the ductus deferens, or the vas deferens as well. So looking over here at a general view of the histology. Remember, histology is basically the tissue view, a stained piece of tissue, so you can see what the interior looks like. Here are the individual septa. Seminiferous tubules are sectioned when you do a coronal section, so you can see sections of these tubes. Here's the straight tubule leading up to the ret testes right up in here, and then eventually leading up here to the epididymis and out through the ductus deferens. So between the seminiferous tubules, we have the interstitial endocrinocytes, or the Leydig cells. And so the Leydig cells are the endocrine portion of the male reproductive system, or of the testes. These are the cells that are going to be secreting testosterone and other androgens. Don't worry about what they are right now, and testosterone is the main androgen that we find in being produced by the Leydig cells, but there are some other androgens as well. Basically, what the endocrinocytes are going to do via testosterone secretion is stimulate spermatogenesis, promote physical and functional maturation of sperm and physical and functional maturation of other organs in the male body, maintain the accessory organs of the male reproductive tract, which we'll go over separately later on in this lecture, stimulate growth metabolism throughout the body. So testosterone will change the metabolism of, let's say, for example, skeletal muscle. It'll help influence brain development and stimulate sexual behaviors and sexual drive. And testosterone is going to accelerate big time during puberty, which we recognize as one of the main growth periods in male humans. It's also going to stimulate our secondary sexual characteristics like facial hair, a redistribution of adipose tissue, an increase in muscle mass in males, and it's going to increase the total body size. So testosterone does increase total body size in developing males by increasing the turnover of mitosis in the growth plates in the bones. That happens to some degree in females. There are other things that happen in females, though, that we'll go over later. So let's start with the scrotum, the exterior of the testes. It's a pouch, basically, that suspends the testes inferior to the perineum and anterior forward to the anus. It's a thin layer of skin with underlying fascia or connective tissue. It's divided into two separate chambers, and the separation inferiorly is the perineal raphe. There are two muscles, the dartos muscle, which is a smooth muscle in the dermis. This helps elevate the testes. It gives the wrinkled surface appearance of the testes. And then the cremaster muscle, which is a series of skeletal muscles deep in the dermis. This is what's going to be pulling the testes in closer to the body when body temperature, or I should say external temperature, drops, and the testes can be pulled closer to the body to help keep the testes warm. The cremaster muscle contracts during sexual arousal, and it does respond to temperature changes. It allows relaxation during hotter exposure to warmer temperatures so that the testes can descend out of the body or farther away from the body to help keep the sperm from getting too warm. We will pick up on spermatogenesis in part 2 of this lecture.